Welcome back to our Global to Local series. Joining us today online, we have Enoch Azasu, all the way from St. Louis, Missouri. Enoch received his Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Ghana in 2010, where he worked at the psychology department, tutoring students and leading lab experiments in cognitive psych. After a couple of years, Enoch then pursued an MBA in total quality management from the University of Professional Studies in Ghana and graduated in 2016. In 2017, Enoch was awarded the McDonald Academy Scholar of Ghana after being admitted into the MSW program at the Brown School of Washington University in St. Louis. Immediately after, he started his PhD program, where his area of interest is in mental health, specifically in suicide prevention. At the Brown School, he worked with the Race and Opportunity Lab as a research associate in social mobility outcomes, mental health, and suicide prevention among Black boys and young men. Enoch loves doing community work and has served the youth in his community with passion for more than a decade. He is the founder of Stay Ghana, a nonprofit that focuses on suicide prevention among Ghanaian youths. Thank you for joining us today, Enoch, and I'll bring it over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for the, I hope I got your name right, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you all for coming to join this presentation today. I'm really honored to be here today to talk about suicide among Ghanaian adolescents. We would go broad by talking about suicide in the African diaspora, and then we'll narrow down to suicide, sociocultural risk of suicide among Ghanaian adolescents. And already Michelle has said a lot about me already, so I'll just maybe go straight into it. And I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Okay, yes. So, and I hope everyone can see my slide. All right, so we'll proceed. So basically, as Michelle said, I'll just talk about my profile. I'll talk about suicide in the African diaspora, and then I'll talk about Stay Ghana, and then I'll take some questions. So my educational journey, as was said earlier, I started from the University of Ghana. I read psychology from 2006 to 2010, and I went into MBA and did some business courses just to get some leadership experience. And then I also did my MSW at the Brown School, and then I'm currently in my third year as a PhD student. So I'll talk a little bit about how I came into mental health, how I became interested in mental health. So those times when I used to work in my community, when I used to go around schools trying to talk to students about their, how to achieve their academic goals, there was a time I met one classmate of mine, and she was going through some difficulty. And at that time, her parents wanted her to go into psychiatric treatment, but she felt that she needed some counseling and maybe some therapy, and no one was listening to her. And she was forced into a psychiatric institution, and her condition became worse. And, so at that time, I stepped in trying to talk to her mom, trying to talk to her parents, just for them to understand her, try to get her from that kind of institutionalized medicinal approach to mental health to get her a counselor. But after some time, I think they listened, and then as she was referred to a counseling and therapy session, with time she became better, and right now she's practicing as a pharmacist. She was able to complete school and do all that. So that was where I developed the passion to go into this work. So my area of interest, as was said, is mental health. Currently, I'm focusing on suicide in the African diaspora, and I'm currently with the Race and Opportunity Lab. I've been with them since 2018. My mentor is Dr. Joe, and I'm the data manager for the lab. We work on various projects in the lab, various NIH projects. We have an EMA suicide project, which looks at how we can use mobile applications to help people to deal with suicide stresses or causes of suicide. And then we also have a CAMS for Teens project. And for those who know CAMS is like an intervention or a therapy technique that is used to intervene with suicide among teenagers. So we are trying to test the efficacy of CAMS among the Black population in St. Louis here. So those are the projects I'm working on currently. And as you can see in the picture, that's my dad and my uncle when I graduated from University of Ghana. Very old picture. So the next thing I'll talk about is we'll go into, Africa. If we want to talk about suicide in the African diaspora, we just need to know what, just a little bit about Africa. And I don't know how many of you have been to Africa before, but for those who have been there, I'm sure you can attest to the fact that it's a really large continent. We have about 54 countries in the African Union. There are vast water bodies. The climate there is kind of sunny, humid, dry. We are blessed with a lot of cash crops, cocoa, coffee. I put some pictures of cocoa there. Those who like hot chocolate, that is how cocoa looks like at the top corner. Some people have never seen how the cocoa beans look like, so I just put a picture there as well. We have a lot of minerals like gold, diamond, so many things that the continent is blessed with. And I just wanted to just say a little bit about the continent for people to understand the background of where we are from. And you kind of see that Africa is like in the central part of the world. The equator cuts through, the meridian cuts through. So it's like kind of in the center of the earth, of the world. So the next thing I'll talk about is African culture, And when we say culture, we are talking about different ideas, and that are put together. And Africa is like a culturally diverse region. We have different languages, different food, different religious practices, so many things that makes us unique. And that is one thing that makes Africa stand out. And I'll talk about some of the characteristics, the unique cultural characteristics that we share. I think the first one, which I'll talk about, is our beliefs and practices. In Africa, we believe we have strong moral principles or a set of beliefs and practices that usually the people follow. And we follow those strong sets of beliefs because we feel that those things help us to prolong our life on earth. It makes us more to be able to live together as a community. I'm not saying that there are no beliefs and practices in other cultures, but I'm just saying that African culture kind of has a very unique set of beliefs, which are kind of what keeps us together. So you realize that certain behaviors that makes people like stealing, let's say bad social vices, you realize that people are afraid to commit those behaviors in Africa. I'm not saying that they don't do that, but realize that there are consequences that comes with those things. And there are various proverbs, wise sayings that we use to guide ourselves in the continent, just kind of help us to maintain that strong moral background. The next thing I'll talk about is religion. And traditional African religion is a key component of African culture. We Africans believe in a supreme being, and we believe that we also believe in the existence of spirits. We believe that our ancestors, when they die, they are there and they protect us. There are so many things that makes us our religion, our traditional African religion, unique. There's a clear distinction between, good and evil. We even ascribe spiritual meaning to everything: the rivers, the mountains, the forests that we have in Africa. Some of them have been given special names. Even the days of the week, that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, there are names. There are spiritual names that are ascribed to those names, just because we believe that we have a strong connection with the supreme being, the ancestors, the spirits. There's kind of a strong connection in that African cultural setting. So the next thing I'll talk about is the political institutions. Now, if I talk about political institutions, I'm going to include family, because in Africa, in African culture, we have a well-established political institutions of governance, okay, where we kind of respect our leaders, we fear them. There's a political order in the traditional African society. It starts with the family, which is the most fundamental and important part. Every family has a family head, and then in the community, you have the village head. Then there can be a tribal head or a clan leader, a paramount chief. It goes in a hierarchy. So the chieftaincy institution of Africa has been there even before colonization, and it has all these checks and balances to make sure that, the governance is for the people. The chiefs have their council of elders. So there was a kind of total loyalty to this political institution, and that is what makes the African culture unique. There are various things I can talk about in terms of our arts. We have special, you know, painting, literature, sculpture, textiles, pottery. All those things makes African culture unique, and also the economic culture of the continent. We are looking at how the traditional African society kind of cooperates in terms of how we work together to move our livelihoods, like fishing, farming. We come to certain communities in Africa where people come together to farm. People even have a lot of kids just because they want to use to have that kind of economic power. So those are certain things that are unique to Africa. So I just want to conclude by saying that these characteristics and values that define the African culture, they are linked, and we understand them as a way by which we preserve the values for our existence. But the most important question that I'll ask after this point is that how are there possible cultural influences, in terms when we want to relate our culture to suicide, are there possible cultural influences on how an individual perceives the precipitating risk factors of suicide they experience? So in other words, your cultural orientation, does it affect how you experience some of the psychological stresses, just maybe psychic, maybe how you think about death, all those things. So those are the things that I want to get into now. So the epidemiology of suicide in Africa. So first of all, I just want to say that, suicide occurs all around the world. Okay, the WHO estimates that over 700,000 people die by suicide worldwide every year. However, out of that number, 77% of that occurs in low and middle income countries. And we all know that Africa has a lot of low and middle income countries. So it tells you that a lot of suicide occurs in our region. And our suicide rates currently is at 11.2 per 100,000 population, which is higher than the global average. The global average of suicide, the whole world, is 9 out of 100,000 per population. So as of 2019, the most recent data that we have, Africa stands at 11.2 per 100,000 population, which is higher than the global average. Several studies have shown that historically, over the years, the rates of suicide have been high in Africa. In fact, those who, the colonialists actually wrote and tried to portray the impression that suicide wasn't a problem in Africa. Because as we know, we try to talk more about suicide occurring in Western countries than in Africa. Nobody talks about suicide in Africa. But historically, historians have also written that suicide used to occur in Africa a lot. And right now, with WHO coming in to measure, we are seeing that there's a lot of suicide going on in Africa. But still, we don't have information on these trends over time, because the WHO goes in maybe every 5 years, every 4 years. So we still don't have national statistics for various aspects of suicide like the way we have in the Western countries. So it's a little bit difficult to report some of these rates and monitor these trends over time. And I also want to talk about the sex and age differences when it comes to suicide. And with sex, I'll talk about males and females, because I know gender, sex is broad, but right now in Africa, we still don't have the opportunity to measure all the various ranges of gender and sex that we have. So for now, the data we have is on males and females, and the data shows that the rate of suicide for males is higher than females. Right now, males are around 18 per 100,000 population, and females are around 5.2. So this evidence of gender differences is there, and also among, adolescents 15 to 29 years, they have the highest suicide rates in Africa. So this is all data from the WHO in 2019. So the question is, as we lose younger generations of Africans to suicide, this has severe consequences for the continent, because we know suicide comes with a cost. Okay, there's a medical cost, there's work loss, there's people lose their quality of life, and we even lose able-bodied men and women, to suicide. So if we want to grow as a continent, if we want to develop our natural resources that we have, we cannot do that if we keep losing future generations. The contrast is this: in the Western world, in America, in Europe, suicide occurs among older generations more. But in Africa, the younger generations are dying by suicide. we are losing future generations. And that is the key thing, the key point we'll be talking about today. So this is a paper that I wrote. It's in press, it's been accepted and it's in press. And it talks about the correlates of suicide among middle and senior high school students, because this is the age group that we are concerned about. So this is a secondary analysis that we did to add to the literature on suicide in Ghana. So in Ghana, suicide among younger ages is a public health concern. And Ghana is faced with high prevalence of suicide ideation, so about 18%. And this is all WHO data, 22% of suicide plan, and then 22% of suicide attempts, okay? And the most common means of suicide among this age group, which is the adolescent age group, is hanging. And the studies have found that the risk factors of suicide among this age group includes bullying, physical attack, physical fight, and food insecurity, okay? And then also they found some relationship between the adolescents' home and school environments and suicide attempts among these high school students. So the gap that I was trying to bridge with this study is that I was trying to look at what do we know about suicide in the years preceding the high school, okay? Because if we want to intervene with suicide, we need to know how early that suicide starts, okay? Suicide risks among younger ages can help us to be able to ask the right questions, you know? And then it is also important to kind of study these suicide behaviors among early ages so that we can detect early and intervene early. The key is what? Early detection and then early intervention. So that is the gap that I was trying to use this study to fill. So the main aim of the study was that I wanted to explore the characteristics and recent patterns of suicide among Ghanaian middle and high school students. I was using the same WHO data from 2012. In fact, that's the latest data that we have when it comes to suicide in Ghana. So the findings was going to help us to be able to identify students at risk, particularly those who are highly impulsive. You know, there's some group of students who don't really, they don't report that they are thinking about suicide. They just go straight and they attempt. So that is what the purpose of this study was. So I used data from the WHO Global Student-Based Survey. So they collect this data, you know, every now and then. The last time they did it was 2012. I'm hoping that I'm the next person who's going to do this in the next maybe couple of years, if they'll give me that opportunity. So they do it with CDC from the US, and then there's an university in the US as well, Middle State, Tennessee, and then the Ghana Education Service. They come together to do this study every year. So they just measure, just like the YRBSS. I don't know if some of you have heard about the YRBSS in the US. So it's like a youth risk behavior survey. So for this study, they used students from selected middle and senior high school students. They used a cluster sampling so that they can be able to generalize to the entire Ghanaian population. And then they measured, so the measures that they used were, they measured age, the gender, the school level. In this case, they limited the gender to male and female. They measured all these possible risk factors, hunger, and all that. And then they also measured suicide ideation, which was measured on nominal scale, yes or no, suicide plan, yes or no, and then suicide attempt. So basically, they just wanted to know, in the last 12 months, did you think about suicide? In the last 12 months, did you plan to engage in suicide? In the last 12 months, did you attempt suicide? So those were the questions they asked the participants. So let's look at the characteristics of the sample. Now, the sample, they had about 3,600 samples, students for the study. 45% of them were middle school students and 54% were high school students. And then more than 50% were male. So I used the SPSS, I used correlation. I tried to correlate the independent variables, and I also did a multivariate logistic regression, you know, to kind of look at the relationships between these independent variables and then the dependent variables. And then I adjusted, you know, for other factors. So the key finding from this study, and as you can see from the chart, is that suicide was more prevalent among middle school students than high school students. If you look at the ideation, middle school students were high. When you look at suicide plan, middle school students were high. Attempts, they were high. And for suicide attempts, the difference between middle school and high school students was significant. And you know, when we are talking statistics and we say something is significant, it means the difference is big enough, you know, to a cause for concern. And that was what my chi-square analysis revealed. So we have a crisis among middle school students when it comes to suicide in Ghana. Other key findings, you know, was that in the population, the whole population, suicide ideation was around 19%. Suicide plan, 22%, and attempt was 25%. Now, observe how the numbers increase, 19 to 22 to 25. In the Western world, we see that I would say in some studies have shown that usually the number of people who ideate will be higher than those who plan, and those who attempt will be lower. So kind of it reduces. But in this case, it's increasing. It's increasing said that someone who has experienced suicide ideation is 9 times more likely to make a plan. And someone who plans suicide is 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. These are very serious numbers. So it tells us that suicide thoughts and behaviors are among the strongest predictors of suicide among Ghanaian adolescents. Now, all this is saying is that you don't want people to jump straight from ideation and go to plan. So it means there are some people who are just standing up and then they just attempt. So if you are a clinician and are measuring, let's say people who are having suicide ideation, you go to a school and you measure students who are having suicide ideation, and you find 90% of them have suicide ideation. There's an extra number of people who are there who are not telling you that they are having ideation, but they are ready to attempt in the future. That is impulsive suicide behavior. And it's something that needs to be explored when it comes to suicide among Ghanaian youth, adolescents. And I'll go into it later. My study also found that when it comes to the risk factors, okay, for suicide ideation, you realize that the males were 1.5 times more likely to have suicide thoughts than females. So females are thinking about suicide less. Okay, we'll come into that. We found that worry, bullying, physical attacks were increasing the likelihood for suicidal thoughts. Now, when it comes to suicide plan, the same worry, physical attack, they increase the likelihood of someone making a suicide plan. With attempt as well, we found that worry, bullying, physical attack, sexual intercourse significantly increase the likelihood of a suicide attempt. And in terms of the protective factors, students who had one or more close friends were 50% less likely to plan and attempt suicide. So they thought about suicide, but they were less likely to plan and attempt suicide. And then the parental factors, which is parental involvement, understanding, guidance, they reduce the likelihood of all suicide behaviors in the population. So what does this result tell us? And I'm going to go into it deeper in the next slide. So first thing, this result is telling us that suicide is occurring among younger Ghanaians than previously documented. Because there's few studies that we know talks about suicide among high school students, suicide among adults, but they don't talk about the middle school years. And this study has brought that to light, that there's a crisis of suicide among children. And we don't even know the age of onset. We don't even know when they are starting to think about or engage in these suicide behaviors. We don't even know whether they start doing that. And these are 12 to 18-year-olds. We don't even know whether they start doing that at the age of 10, at the age of 11, even at the age of 9, we don't know. So this is something that future study have to go into. Now, this study is also telling us that people are moving, students are engaging in suicide behaviors impulsively, okay? They are not showing any sign of thoughts, they are not showing any sign of a plan, but they just move into attempts. So we are asking very important questions. What are the experiences of middle school students that cause them to have these proportionally higher rates of suicide than high school students? Okay, How do these children, encounter the risk factors for suicide? How are they experiencing these stresses? Because a middle school child, how do they encounter these stresses of, psychological stresses that makes them think about suicide? And what age are they encountering that? And these questions can help us to be able to know the kind of the areas that we can intervene for these children. I'll talk more about the implications, and this is why I bring in the gender effect. So we are seeing that girls are thinking about suicide less than boys. However, when it comes to suicide attempts, there's no difference between boys and girls. So what is going on? What is going on? Are females more impulsive? Again, let me make this clear. We are not able to measure the broad range of gender and sex variables that we have in Ghana because of this study did not do that. But future studies, we might be able to measure all the various forms of gender identities that we have, just so that we can know, just to know more. So I'll go back to my question. Why are females engaging in thinking about suicide less, but engaging more in suicide? And that is a question, So the question is that, is it about gender norms? Are adolescent girls facing more stress? Is it about the culture? We need to ask these questions. And then the next thing is that we found that it means that if this age group 12 to 18 years old, are experiencing high rates of suicide behaviors, what does it tell you about that age group, the age in which they are, the adolescent age? Is it overwhelming for them? Is that age, that age range, is that age period or that stage of life a risk factor for suicide? Why are they experiencing anxieties? Why are they experiencing worry? Why are they experiencing all these issues causing them to think about suicide? We know that, of course, adolescence is a very difficult time of life to handle. There are so many things that they have to handle: schoolwork, relationships, their identity, their body image, even their future. There are so many things that they worry about. It can be overwhelming. So those are the questions we need to start asking. And then in terms of sexual activity and sexual choices, it is not surprising, okay, that we found a relationship between sexual activity and then suicide attempts. So what are we saying? Are we saying that at this stage of life, students are already beginning to make sexual decisions? Is it an opportunity to intervene? Is it an opportunity to start saying that let's start doing more sex education? Those are the things that we need to ask. I'll just jump straight into the close friends, which are the protective factors. And what does this tell us? It tells us that students are willing to talk to each other. And I think that finding provides an opportunity for us to say, what are the intervention techniques that we can model around peer-to-peer relationships? Who do adolescents trust more? Do they trust their teachers more? Do they trust their friends more? Do they trust their counselors more? And then when it comes to the parents, the role of the parents, we found out that parents have a role to play. Their time that is spent with the children reduce their likelihood of engaging or thinking about suicide. So these are the things that this study found and which we need to talk about. So I'll move straight into the broad picture. So why do people die by suicide in Africa? And that is a question that my current area, that is the question I'm trying to answer with my work that I'm doing. Because if you are studying suicide in the African diaspora, the question that you want to ask is that, what is the meaning and characterization of suicide behavior on the continent as against other cultures? Because we know among the Japanese, for instance, okay, suicide behaviors can be indifferent to some. It can be considered a honorable action among the Japanese. And then in some cultures in Asia, it's an indifferent attitude. When you go to Europe, there's full condemnation of suicide. Even in ancient Africa, back in the Egyptian those days in the second millennium, they view suicide differently. They saw it as a violation of religious or legal codes. So what does suicide mean in African culture? And what literature do we have to back it up to say that we can be able to say that this is, when it comes to suicide in Africa, this is why people, or these are the reasons, these are the contextual factors that can help us to say that someone is more or understands suicide this way. And these are the things that will lead to someone engaging in suicide behaviors. So we still do not know. And there are no studies, currently, or there are limited studies that are focused on the definition and explanation of suicide in the African context. I'm not saying that suicide that we know is different, or we should do away with what we know about suicide and then try to create a whole new theory of suicide in Africa. I'm just saying it's a philosophical question. Why do people die by suicide in Africa? Does the cultural or contextual factors provide any clues to why someone in an African culture or society will end their life? This question I'm asking is very important, because once we understand the question, we can understand the decision-making process of an individual when they are engaging in suicide behavior. So when someone is maybe thinking about suicide or planning suicide, we can be able to know, or maybe a clinician receives a patient who is having suicide ideation, we can be able to know that what factors in that person's life can be related to the experience that to what the person is experiencing. Okay. And if the context matters, then it's not only about the psychological criteria, because I know in some countries, or let me say in the Western world, suicide is seen more as a psychological phenomenon. Okay, they try to link it to, depression and other things. Okay, but in our culture, suicide can even be seen as a sin. Okay, suicide can be seen as a psychotic act. Sometimes it can be deemed so unimaginable that people can reject families just because someone in that family is thinking about suicide. So we need to ask these contextual questions so that we can begin to draw from a social perspective, even a psychological perspective, or any other perspective that we can find to be able to understand suicide in the African continent. So I want to kind of summarize this up and go into what we know about suicide right now and what opportunities that we have for research on suicide in the African continent. Now, remember, this is a developing area. This is an area that is going to be part of my career, as I work on. So right now, all the things I'm saying are things that information that I have now. More information might come up, and I just want to put out what I think we should be doing in terms of trying to get an understanding of why people die by suicide in the African diaspora. So the first thing I'll say is that we know, first of all, we know that there are no reliable suicide attempt rates for countries in Africa. We only have the WHO, who comes in once in a while and measures and do their studies, And the reason why there are no clear-cut data is because suicide carries negative religious and cultural consequences in the African countries. So because of that, it is underreported, it is hidden, it is misclassified. And also sometimes it's even difficult to determine the intent of someone. So in some countries, they're mistaking a suicide act as unintentional, okay? And for instance, when someone, jumps, into, let's say, onto a railway, sorry for that graphic image, but in some countries, they are more likely to classify that as a non-suicide than maybe someone using a firearm or hanging, okay? So we need a reliable way to survey suicide data in Africa. Because once we are able to understand how to classify this data well, they are strongly correlated with, clinical practice, policy, and prevention. being able to classify and explain data properly can help you to be able to what? To develop good interventions to intervene, to kind of step in for people who are experiencing suicide crisis. The second thing I'll talk about is the methods of suicide. So if we know the most common methods of suicide in Africa, it will be helpful to develop preventive strategies. So for instance, in the US, we know that firearm is like one of the most used means of suicide. So you realize that there are gun locks that are provided. There are safety trainings, in terms of how people can store their guns or use their guns, just because we know, that firearm is the most used means of suicide in the US. But we need to know the same for Africa. Once we know the same for Africa, we can intervene, and we can be able to prevent. And in Africa, the most lethal means was hanging, as the studies have shown. So being able to understand, the proportion, which populations or which group of populations are more likely to use which method can help us be able to prevent. Another means of suicide, which was common, as I reviewed the literature, was poison or pesticide poisoning. And you realize that those also get lost because people are not able to capture that data as well. So you realize that maybe someone who goes to, and because it's a farming, let's say a farming community, and a farmer goes to buy a pesticide to use for his crops, but he goes home and uses it, as a means of suicide. When it happens that way, we don't even know what caused the suicide. So it's very difficult to intervene so that we can maybe do some background checks. When someone is going to buy a pesticide, we can be sure what the person is going to use the pesticide for. So that is just an example of the point I'm making. The next point is the fact that if we want to identify high-risk groups and want to develop prevention strategies, effective ones, we need to understand the antecedents to suicide. As all this talk has shown, suicide is multifactorial. Okay, there are various social, cultural, and psychological factors playing a role. So in Africa, if we are able to gather retrospectively, from medical records, relative reports, just gather information to be able to characterize the risk for suicide behavior in Africa, we can be able to identify high-risk groups. For instance, studies have shown that people who are unemployed, for instance, they are more likely to engage in suicide. So those are some of the sociocultural information. People who have physical health problems, people who have psychiatric disorders, various issues that we can gather information on so that we know. Like, for instance, when COVID-19 came as a pandemic, right now studies have shown in the US that there was a link between the pandemic and rates of suicide. If we are able to have such information, we can use it as an effective prevention strategy and be able to identify people who are at high risk of suicide. So that is the next point. And all these things can be obtained by doing more qualitative research, because these are all qualitative information. You need to do more focus groups, qualitative studies to be able to dig into these little details. So the one thing we should, and as I draw a conclusion on this, is that suicide prevention is largely ignored, on the African continent, and most of the countries don't have a national strategy, or plan towards suicide prevention. Okay, except for some countries in South Africa who have systems in place to track suicide behaviors and death. But most countries don't even have any of those systems in place. And what makes it worse is that some countries in Africa have laws in place that penalize suicide behaviors. Because for them, they feel like, if there's a law that says that if you attempt suicide, the police will arrest you, people will not attempt suicide. And that is a traditional way of, from the traditional days, those things were in the old traditions. But these things are rather harming the work towards suicide prevention. The steps that we are taking towards suicide prevention, these laws and these systems national level are not helping to solve this problem of suicide on the continent. So there's clearly an opportunity where we can say that, look, why don't we shift our suicide prevention approaches from the traditional way of doing things to the more modern way, like decriminalizing suicide behavior, so that when someone is thinking about suicide, it's no longer a criminal offense. And recently, Ghana, my country, have started steps to decriminalize suicide at the parliamentary level. And many countries can follow suit. And that can be a strong paradigm shift of how to handle suicide in the population. It can be very, very important to reducing stigma, you know. And if there's more institutional support for suicide research, it can be very useful as you develop evidence-based approaches. So that is my suggestions or my ideas that I think we can use as we try to reduce suicide on the African continent. So at this point, I'll talk about Stay Ghana. And a lot of people have been asking me, what is Stay Ghana? What is Stay Ghana? So as a social worker, we don't just identify solutions. Research can be boring. Let me say, as a researcher, you can get all these figures, get all these things in place. But we need people on the ground, okay? We need therapists, we need field workers, we need people who are going to schools, school social workers, people who are working in the communities. If we want to work to reduce problems like suicide, we need to have people on the ground to do this work. And that is what made me to form Stay Ghana. So Stay Ghana was one of the ways that I was working to create awareness of the importance of mental health and trying to prevent suicide among Ghanaian youth. Then the slogan is Stay for you. So it's coincidentally a very popular Ghanaian game for young people where someone says stay and then you try to freeze. I don't know, I think they have it in American culture as well. You freeze and then you say for you. So the main focus of Stay Ghana was that we want to ensure that students are aware, okay, that there are stresses that they face in their daily lives, when it comes to the way they deal with, their future, their academics, even their interpersonal relationships. Those things are likely to cause stresses to them. And we wanted to bring that awareness to them so that they can have that knowledge. And having the knowledge will provide them the resilience to deal with these stresses whilst they seek their educational goals. So we used to go to schools, talk to students, various things, and also trying to provide students an opportunity for them to achieve some of their goals or attain some of their goals. We just wanted them to know that they are not alone. So Stay Ghana is like in the near future, we are trying to look at how we can partner with educational stakeholders, parents, to create an even bigger platform so that we can advance mental health awareness among Ghanaian youth. So that is the plans that Stay Ghana has. Right now, because I'm in the US, I'm trying to focus on my dissertation work. It's a little bit difficult, but over the years, we have done assessments, trying to just a broad idea of how students are faring at the university, in their schools, in terms of how they are dealing with the stresses that they face. So that is the main goal of this project of mine. So at this point, I want to conclude my presentation. I want to, first of all, thank Buffalo University for this opportunity. I want to thank the McDonald International Scholars Academy, which is my fellowship. I also want to thank the Brown School at WashU. I want to thank the Race and Opportunity Lab, my mentor, Dr. Sean Joe, who coincidentally is the president of SWER. And I want to thank my colleagues and friends who are here for all the support you have given me throughout this journey. And I want to say that this is only the beginning. And as Daniel Benham says, making little plans don't have any magic. We have to make big plans. We have to aim high in hope and work. And my goal is that one day we'll be able to spread social work across the African continent people can be able to have social work education and be trained so that they can deliver the service that is needed, as we try to improve the lives of the youth in Africa. So thank you all for your time. That is my contact information. You can always reach out to me via email. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to you. And I'm grateful that you guys took your time to listen to me. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions for Enoch?
Yes, I think there's a question. Says, we see a huge difference in ideation. Okay, let me take it one by one. First, from Graham, it says, for future research, have you thought of conducting a mixed method study to understand the role of intersectionality on suicide among adolescents in Ghana? Also, are there measures to understand the role of stigma and other malleable factors associated with suicide that can be targeted to ensure adolescents are supported pre-suicide attempt or behavior? So, Graham, the first question, which has to do with the mixed method study. So I'm hoping that in my dissertation work, I'll be able to do a mixed method study, do a focus group, to be able to understand how all these intersectionality factors, contribute to exacerbate the risk factors of suicide among adolescents. So that is a plan. And all these measures that are there, in fact, most of the studies, as I said, there are few studies on suicide in Africa, and most of the studies have not been able to measure these factors. Even the WHO study kind of, it's like a broad study that measures general health issues. It doesn't really have a specific emphasis on stigma and suicide. So we are hoping that we can be able to include some of these measures in the studies that we'll be doing in the future. And then from Michael, he says that we see a huge difference in ideation rate and attempted rate of suicide in Ghana. Does the current law penalize suicide attempts or abetment play a role in these differences? In your opinion, how can we look at not just legal means of controlling suicide, but other measures? So currently the law on suicide says that when you attempt, it's a criminal offense. And the police are those who enforce that law. So right now, if someone is thinking about suicide or making a suicide plan, that person is not able to, seek help, and that person is also afraid to attempt and not die by suicide, because once you attempt and you don't die, you can be arrested. So that's what makes people to go straight and use very lethal means, so that when they attempt, then they know that it's done, so that nobody gets to arrest them or anything. So, and also realize that people can report you. Okay, people can even go and report you that, hey, this person is doing this, and it can become an issue for you. And those are the things that the law is trying to correct. I think the parliament will do something about it. And then the other means of controlling suicide. As we said, suicide is because it's a thought process. Yes, I wouldn't say we'll control, but we will work to reduce the burden, the burden of the stresses that people face that makes them to think about suicide. And that is what we want to work on. So once you are doing that advocacy, awareness, going to schools, making talks, letting students know that these are the things, the risk factors, letting them understand, letting them be able to build their resilience and build their confidence to be able to talk to someone, those are the things that we can use. Those are the things that are So thank you for that question. So from Richard, I said, how can we shift the narrative about mental health? For example, in South Asian culture, some people resort to religion for reason and often brush mental illness as a supernatural force. How would we change that narrative? Yes, so changing that narrative comes with, for instance, I have in my dissertation, I'm hoping to measure religiosity, and studies have shown that religiosity has a link with how people, even assess mental health treatment, how people kind of think about mental health and suicide, to be specific. So the ways by which we can change that is to begin to involve the religious groups, okay? Because even in the Bible, and I was working on a book recently which talks about what does the Bible say about suicide. Even in the Bible, even though there are certain aspects, certain sections of the Bible that frown on suicide, there are certain sections of the Bible that talk about seeking help, speaking to someone, going for help. I'm not here to preach, and I want to I want to acknowledge the fact that there are various religious groups in this setting. People could be Muslims, so I don't know about what the Quran says, but I know in the Bible there is an element of help seeking. Jesus encourages us to seek help. So those are the things that we need to preach rather than completely dismissing mental illness. Okay, and that can be helpful when our religious leaders are brought on board. We need to put them, involve them, do focus groups on these religious leaders, how they can be of help to kind of send this message across. So that is how I'll do that. Thank you for that question. And then from Lillian, are schools in Ghana staffed with many social workers, or is it few and far between? Also, you might have touched on this and I missed it in the beginning. Are there differences between suicide rates in rural and urban areas in Ghana? Good, very good question. So right now, as we speak, most schools don't have formal counseling centers, okay? You see it in private schools, but public schools do not have, and they don't have social workers in school. So you realize that all the students have is their teachers, okay? And I did a survey some time back where the students were like, I prefer to talk to my friend. And even the WHO study says, I prefer to talk to my friend than my teacher, because the teacher may not be trained on how to handle, set questions from a student. Your student comes to you and then the teacher will be like, well, sit down. I don't know what's wrong with you. Those are the kind of training that we need to do for teachers, and we can even save ourselves the time of having to train every teacher by having social workers in schools. And that is a very good point that you made. And I am putting that plan is in the Stay Ghana plan, whereby we train more people to be able to go into school social work. And also about suicide rates, differences in rural and urban areas. There are no studies currently. There are no studies to say that it's more in urban areas than rural areas. There are no studies, but it's something that can be explored. And I think in the future, we might be exploring that. So Stay Ghana in 5 years. So in the next 5 years, right now, when I'm done with my dissertation, I think I'll be focusing more on trying to get some grants to begin to do more epidemiological research. And that is where Stay Ghana is going to come in. Stay Ghana is going to be like a center. We're going to apply for grants to do more to do more epidemiological studies on suicide in the African diaspora, starting from Ghana. Because once we know more about the risk factors, we know more about the protective factors, we know more about all the things that can contribute to these problems, we can be able to intervene properly. And that is where I see Stay Ghana in the next 5 years. I want to see us at the forefront, training, conducting research, and creating an opportunity for students to engage and interact and share their ideas on how they can be able to deal with these stresses that they are facing in their lives. I think Keith has a hand up. Keith has a hand up if you want to talk.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to regulate my camera as well. First of all, what a very impressive and important presentation. And thank you so very much. I want to welcome you to UB School of Social Work. I'm the dean and of course joined with a wonderful array of students and colleagues today. You talked about protective factors, and I know that we're at the end, so I don't mean to monopolize the time, but you talked about protective factors, and you also mentioned that when a youth has a friend or friends, they can serve or they actually serve as a protective factor from the standpoint of that support mechanism being in place. How much of a burden, if a burden at all, can we help in bolstering those friendship networks so that it also aids in the prevention of suicide, because we realize that we're talking about an age group that has so much promise, while at the same time, if there are those individuals who can be supportive in a greater fashion, how do we do that in a way that doesn't, and I hesitate to use the word burden, but I'll use it in this instance, burden them more. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. And Mr. Dean, nice to meet you. So a very important question. As you are saying, these are young ages who you don't want to burden them so much with having to care so much for their friends more than they do for themselves. But also, you also want them to have that culture that they are in this together. And you realize that based on what we know from the US, how some of these peer-to-peer interventions have worked, it's more or less like a friendship group, focus group, network groups. And that is what I'm planning to do with this project. If we can have opportunities where students can have maybe 30 minutes after school, or it's like an after school club where they are able to engage with each other. They don't need to even talk about suicide, but they can have the opportunity whereby they break that they have a very good communication with each other. Then it makes it easier for them to talk to each other, maybe in private, and say that, okay, hey, I know you from basketball club, or I know you from book club, and I'm facing a difficulty at home, it's stressing me out. And then this student can be a form of help and can refer the person to the school counselors that will be there. So they can act as a source of referral, and as you're saying, as young as they are, sometimes it might not occur to them what they need to do. But if we are able to tell them and train them that, oh, your friends are likely to experience this. This is what you need to do. You don't need to judge. You don't need to say things that will make the problem worse. This is what you need to do, A, B, C, D, when your friend tells you this. And those are the things that we need those are the techniques that we need to apply in schools and provide that environment so that these children can be able to be of help to each other.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you too. I'm really grateful for everyone. Any more questions? All right, Richard, can you take over from here?